You ever get that sinking feeling? Like someone pulled the rug out from under you? 3 weeks ago, I smelled dinner on the porch and thought, must be leftovers. Turns out, my family had been sneaking off to eat together without me. Tonight, I finally find out why, and let me tell you, that answer slapped me sideways. Stick with me, this one's messy and it ain't pretty. The air that night was thick with the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary. It was a Tuesday, which was unusual for a big meal, but the scent was unmistakable. It was Mom's signature roast chicken, the kind she only made for Sunday dinners or special occasions. I remember smiling to myself as I fumbled for my keys, my stomach rumbling in anticipation. I'd had a brutal day at work, one of those days where every email felt like a personal attack, and all I wanted was the comfort of home, the familiar weight of a fork in my hand, and the sound of my family's laughter. I pushed the door open, expecting to be hit with a wall of warmth and noise. I expected to see my sister, Maya, setting the table, my dad, Robert, probably hiding in the den with the game on low, and my mom, Carol, bustling around the kitchen, her face flushed from the heat of the oven. Instead, I was met with silence, a deep, hollow quiet that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The lights were dim, the kitchen was clean, spotless even. There were no pots on the stove, no roasting pan cooling on the counter. But the smell was still there, clinging to the curtains, settled deep in the carpets. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. I dropped my bag by the door and walked slowly through the house. It felt empty, like a stage after the play is over. I checked the dining room. The table was bare, save for the usual fruit bowl in the center. I went back to the kitchen and opened the fridge. A half-empty carton of milk, some wilting lettuce, a jar of pickles. No leftovers, no sign of a roast chicken. It was a ghost meal. My mind started racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe they went out? But the smell was so strong, so distinctly here. I walked over to the dishwasher. It was running, humming softly. I cracked it open, and a blast of steam hit my face. Inside, I saw it. 4 plates, 4 sets of silverware, 4 glasses. My mom's plate, the one with the little chip on the edge, Dad's heavy water glass, Maya's fork with the slightly bent tine, and the 4th set, which I knew belonged to my Uncle Frank. But there were only 4, not 5. My plate, the plain white one I'd used since I was a teenager, was still sitting in the cupboard, clean and dry. A cold dread started to creep up my spine. It felt like walking down a set of stairs in the dark and finding one less step than you expected. A jarring, sickening lurch. They'd had dinner, Mom's roast chicken dinner, here, and I wasn't part of it. I slowly closed the dishwasher, the click of the latch echoing in the silent house. It wasn't the first weird thing, I realized. The past few months had been filled with little moments of disconnect, conversations that would stop the second I walked into a room, inside jokes I wasn't privy to. I'd brushed it off as me being paranoid, stressed from work, reading too much into things. But this was different. This was concrete. This was a missing plate. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked to the back door, the one that leads to the porch where my dad and Uncle Frank sometimes sit after dinner. The smell of chicken was even stronger out there. And then I heard it. Voices, muffled, coming from the garage at the end of the driveway. I crept across the lawn, the damp grass soaking through my flats. I could make out my dad's low rumble, my mom's softer tones, Maya's bright laugh. They were all there, hiding in the garage. My first instinct was to march over there and throw the door open, to demand an explanation. But I hesitated. What if it was a surprise party for me? My birthday was for another 4 months? An anniversary? No. I stood there, frozen in the shadows, feeling like a stranger outside my own home, a ghost at my own family's feast. Why was I left out? The question pounded in my head, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking, and I walked towards the side door of the garage. I put my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. I just stood there, listening. I knocked on the door, and what I heard through the wall stopped me cold. Have you ever been shut out by family? That feeling of being on the outside looking in at the people you're supposed to be closest to? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments. I'm curious if I'm alone in this. Before that night, my family was my anchor. We weren't perfect, nobody is, but we were solid. Sunday dinners were a sacred ritual, a non-negotiable part of our week. The menu rarely changed. Mom's roast chicken, Dad's lumpy but weirdly delicious mashed potatoes, and Maya's disastrous attempts at baking a dessert that usually ended with us eating ice cream straight from the tub. We had our spots at the table. I always sat to my dad's left, using the chipped blue plate that had been mine since I could hold a fork. I can still hear the echo of my mom's laugh, a sound that could fill the entire house, a sound that always made me feel safe. She had this way of throwing her head back, her eyes crinkling at the corners, that just made everything feel okay. We had history, we had rhythms, we had promises. I remember my dad telling me when I bought my first car, "You ever get in trouble, you call us. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where. We're your safety net." And I believed him. But looking back now, the cracks were there long before the secret dinner started. They were subtle at first, hairline fractures in the foundation I thought was unbreakable. There was my 30th birthday, about a year ago. They'd always made a huge deal out of birthdays, but last year it was quiet. Mom gave me a gift card, Dad sent a text, and Maya said she was too swamped with work to come into the city for dinner. At the time, I told myself it was fine, that we were all getting older, busier, but it stung. It felt like an afterthought. Then there was the money thing. About 2 years ago, I'd asked my dad for a small loan to help with a down payment on my condo. He ran the family business, a small but respected hardware supply company my grandfather had started. I'd always been told the business was my future, my inheritance, my safety net. But when I asked, he got quiet. His whole body tensed up. He looked over at my mom, a flicker of something. Fear, panic in his eyes. He said the business was having a tight quarter and that it wasn't a good time. We got into an argument, the first real one we'd had in years. I accused him of not trusting me. He just stood there, his jaw tight, silent. He never raised his voice, but his silence was somehow worse. It was a wall, and I couldn't get through it. He eventually gave me the money, but something shifted between us that day. The easy comfort was gone, replaced by a strange, unspoken tension. Uncle Frank started coming around more after that too. He was my mom's brother, a financial advisor who always seemed a little too slick with his polished shoes and crisp shirts. He'd show up unannounced, disappearing into the den with my dad for hours. When they'd emerge, their faces would be grim, the air thick with things I couldn't understand. I'd ask my mom what was going on, and she'd just wave her hand dismissively. "Oh, just business stuff. You know your father, always worrying." She'd smile, but it never reached her eyes. The laughter that used to fill the house became rarer. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I just didn't know what it was. There was one night 2 years ago that started this whole mess, and I swear I never connected it until now. That argument about the loan and Uncle Frank was over. I heard them talking in the den, their voices low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard a single sharp sound. My mother, crying, a choked, desperate sob. When I asked her about it the next day, she said she was just emotional watching an old movie. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. If your family had a skeleton in the closet, a big, ugly secret that could change everything, would you want to know? Or would you rather live in blissful ignorance? Let me know. The night I heard them in the garage, I didn't confront them. I turned around, walked back into the silent house, and went up to my old bedroom. I felt like a coward, but I also felt like I needed proof. I needed something more than a smell and a missing plate before I blew my entire world apart. My paranoia was in overdrive. I felt crazy, like I was fabricating this whole conspiracy. I needed something tangible, something I could hold in my hand and say, "See, I'm not imagining this." The opportunity came a few days later. Maya had left her tablet on the kitchen counter, logged into her account. We shared a family calendar, a digital grid of our lives filled with dentist appointments, birthdays, and reminders to pick up milk. I'd never felt the need to snoop before, but now it felt like a necessity. My hand was trembling as I tapped open the calendar app. I scrolled back through the last few weeks. Every Tuesday, there it was, a recurring event, blocked out from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. The title was just 2 words, Frank's Fix. My blood ran cold. Frank's Fix. It sounded so clinical, so secret. What were they fixing? And why was I not a part of it? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My mind raced through 1,000 horrible possibilities. Was someone sick? Was my parents' marriage in trouble? Were they planning some kind of intervention for me? The ambiguity was torture. I took a screenshot, my finger tapping the screen with a sharp, definitive click. Evidence. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of terror and a strange, sick sort of validation. I wasn't crazy. Something was definitely happening. I was about to close the app when a notification banner popped up at the top of the screen. A text message from Dad to Maya. My heart stopped. I couldn't help myself. I swiped down to read the preview. The message was short, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. It read, "Dinner is on for tonight. Remember the new plan. And for God's sake, don't mention Frank's Fix to Sarah. Not yet. Not yet." Those 2 words echoed in my head. They weren't just hiding something from me. They were planning to tell me, on their terms, in their own time. They were managing me, handling me. The realization was suffocating. It wasn't just that I was being excluded. I was being controlled. My hands went cold. It was real. It was all real. I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the tablet, the screen glowing in the dim light. Tears started to well up in my eyes, hot and angry. The betrayal was so much sharper than I could have imagined. It wasn't a single act. It was a conspiracy, a calculated, ongoing deception by the 4 people I trusted most in the world. I was about to confront Maya the second she walked in the door, but then I saw another message pop up from her, a reply to Dad that changed everything. It said, "Don't worry, she won't find out. It would break her." Break me? What could possibly break me? Would you confront someone the minute you found proof? Or would you wait to gather more information? I'm genuinely torn on this one, so tell me what you would do. After seeing that text, my mission changed. Confrontation felt premature. It would just make them lock down tighter, build their walls higher. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I couldn't be the emotional, hysterical daughter. I had to be a detective. I had to be strategic. I started paying attention to everything. The way my mom nervously pleat her napkin at dinner, the way my dad's eyes would dart towards the garage whenever he thought I wasn't looking, the forced brightness in Maya's voice when she'd ask about my day. It was all a performance, and I was the only one in the audience who didn't have the script. I started testing the waters, dropping little bombs into conversations to see how they'd react. One night at dinner, the 5 of us actually sitting down together for a simple meal of pasta, I casually said, "You know, I was thinking of having Uncle Frank take a look at my finances, maybe help me set up a better investment plan." The reaction was immediate and electric. My mom dropped her fork, and it clattered loudly against her plate. Dad choked on his water. Maya's eyes went wide, and she stared at my mom, a look of pure panic on her face. It was Uncle Frank who recovered first. He gave a tight, thin-lipped smile and said, "Oh, I'm probably too busy for that, kiddo. Stick with one of those online apps. They're great for someone your age." The condescension in his voice was thick, but it was the desperation behind it that I noticed. They were terrified of him looking at my life, at my finances. Why? My inner monologue was a constant, looping track of suspicion and self-doubt. Am I being dramatic? This feels insane. But the calendar, the text, that was real. They're hiding something. But what if it's for my own good? What if I'm the one making things worse by digging? It was exhausting, living in this state of high alert, scrutinizing every word, every glance. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. One afternoon, I was helping Mom fold laundry when her phone buzzed on the table. She was in the other room, so I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from her banking app, a transfer of $5,000 to my dad's account. The memo line was just one word: Band-Aid. A $5,000 Band-Aid? What kind of wound costs that much to cover up? The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was blurry and terrifying. It seemed to be about money. My dad's evasiveness about the loan, their fear of Uncle Frank seeing my finances, this huge cash transfer, it all pointed to some kind of financial disaster. Then came the red herring, the thing that threw me completely off track. I overheard my mom on the phone in the backyard, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper. I only caught a snippet of the conversation, but the words I heard sent a chill down my spine. She said, "We have to sell it. There's no other way, Rob, before she finds out." Sell it? My mind immediately jumped to the house I grew up in, the one filled with every memory I held dear. Were they selling my childhood home out from under me? The thought was so painful, so utterly devastating, that it eclipsed everything else. The betrayal felt monumental. How could they? That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I saw my dad heading out to the garage, toolbox in hand. This was my chance. I followed him out, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The garage was cool and smelled of oil and sawdust. He was standing at his workbench, his back to me, fiddling with a broken lamp. "Dad?" I said, my voice shaking slightly. He turned, and his face was a mask of exhaustion. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I'd ever seen them. "Hey, kid," he said, forcing a smile. "What's up?" I decided to go for it. No more games. "I heard Mom on the phone," I said, watching his face carefully. "Is it true? Are you selling the house?" His smile vanished. He didn't look surprised or even guilty. He just looked defeated. He put down the screwdriver he was holding and wiped his hands on an old rag. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "It's complicated, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet. It was the same line they all used. Complicated. The ultimate non-answer. "What's complicated, Dad?" I pushed. "It's a simple question. Are you selling our home?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a sadness so profound it took my breath away. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He shook his head slowly, and then he said the words that made me freeze. "I wish it were that simple." And then he turned back to the broken lamp, his shoulders slumped, the conversation over. When you dig for the truth, do you risk making things worse? Is there a point where ignorance is actually bliss? I'm starting to wonder. His non-answer was worse than a lie. It was a confirmation that something was terribly wrong, something so big that he couldn't even begin to explain it. I walked out of that garage feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. The secret had become a living thing, a monster that was devouring my family from the inside out. I decided I was done with snooping, done with coded conversations and quiet observations. It was time for a direct confrontation. I waited until the following Sunday. It was supposed to be our family dinner day, but the house had been quiet. No one had mentioned it. I knew they were all home. I could see their cars in the driveway. I walked into the living room, and it was like walking into a tableau. My mom was knitting, her needles clicking with a frantic energy. Maya was scrolling on her phone, pretending to be absorbed in something. Dad was staring out the window. Uncle Frank was there too, sitting in the armchair, nursing a glass of whiskey. The silence was deafening. I stood in the middle of the room, my arms crossed, and I just waited. It took a full minute before my mom looked up, a startled expression on her face. "Sarah, I didn't hear you come in." "I've been here," I said, my voice colder than I intended. The room went still. Everyone was looking at me now. "I want to know what's going on," I said, my voice flat and steady, betraying the storm that was raging inside me. "I want to know about the secret dinners. I want to know about Frank's fix. And I want to know why you are all lying to my face." My mom's face crumpled. She put down her knitting and started to speak, the usual deflections and excuses already forming on her lips. "Honey, you're imagining things. We've just been busy." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare tell me I'm imagining things. I know you've been meeting every Tuesday without me. I know Uncle Frank is involved. I know you're hiding something huge." Maya snorted, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh my God, Sarah, you're being so dramatic. We were planning a surprise party for Mom and Dad's anniversary. You ruined it." It was a good lie, a plausible one, but her eyes gave her away. They were wide with panic, darting towards my mother for backup. My dad just continued to stare out the window, his jaw clenched. Uncle Frank swirled the whiskey in his glass, his face unreadable. The household had gone cold. It was me against them, and the walls were going up so fast I could barely breathe. "A surprise party?" I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "For 3 months, with coded calendar entries and secret text messages telling everyone not to talk to me? Try again." The air crackled with tension. I could feel the years of trust, the lifetime of love, eroding right there in that living room. My emotions were boiling over. I felt so utterly betrayed. This wasn't just about a few dinners. It was about them deciding I wasn't strong enough, or smart enough, or worthy enough to be included in my own family's crisis. It was the classic blood is thicker than water argument playing out in real time. They were a unit, and I was on the outside. "You had no right," I whispered, tears finally starting to burn in my eyes. "Whatever this is, you had no right to shut me out." My mom stood up then, her face a mixture of guilt and a strange, defensiveness. "We were trying to protect you, Sarah." "Protect me from what?" I yelled, the control I'd been holding on to finally snapping. "From the truth? I'm a grown woman. I get to know what's happening in my own family." The room fell silent again. No one knew what to say. The lie had been exposed, and the truth was too terrifying for any of them to speak. Finally, Maya looked at me, her face pale. She spoke 3 little words, and the room felt like it closed in on me. She said, "It's for you." Should they have told me whatever it is? Or were they right to try and protect me? Tell me why or why not in the comments. I need to see this from another perspective. "It's for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. My mind reeled. For me? Was this an intervention? Did they think I had a drinking problem? A gambling addiction? Was I the problem? My entire investigation, my righteous anger, it all suddenly felt foolish. What had I done that was so terrible it required this level of secrecy? I stared at them, my heart sinking into my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "What's for me?" My dad finally turned away from the window. He looked ancient. The weight of the world seemed to be resting on his slumped shoulders. He walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a thick, worn-looking ledger, the old accounting book from my grandfather's business. He set it on the coffee table with a heavy thud. "It's not for you, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then the dam broke. The whole story came tumbling out in a torrent of shame, fear, and regret. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about me. It was about the business. Dad's Hardware, the company my grandfather had built from nothing, the legacy my father had spent his entire life maintaining, was failing. It wasn't just a tight quarter, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. The argument we'd had 2 years ago about the loan wasn't because he didn't trust me, it was because the money wasn't there. He'd given me the loan from his personal savings, draining what little cushion they had left. Uncle Frank hadn't been coming over for social calls. The Frank's Fix dinners were crisis meetings. They had been meeting every Tuesday for months, huddled in the garage with piles of financial statements, loan applications, and legal documents, trying to find a way, any way, to salvage the company, or, failing that, to sell it for parts without anyone finding out. The $5,000 Band-Aid was a loan from Uncle Frank just to make payroll that month. They were drowning, and they had hidden it all from me. Why? I asked, the single word catching in my throat. Why wouldn't you just tell me? It was my mom who answered, her voice choked with tears. She came over and knelt on the floor in front of me, taking my cold hands in hers. "Because of the condo, honey," she said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "You had just been approved for your mortgage. You were so happy, so proud. We saw you building this life for yourself, and we knew if you found out the business was collapsing, it would have destroyed everything." They knew my job, while stable, wasn't enough to carry that mortgage without the promise of the family business as a safety net. If the bank found out my financial backing was about to evaporate, they would have pulled the loan immediately. My dream home would have been gone before I even got the keys. They were trying to keep the business afloat just long enough for my mortgage to close, to get me safely into my new life before their world came crashing down. They were trying to absorb the entire impact themselves. Maya pulled out her phone and showed me a text thread. Not a secret one without me, but one between my dad and the bank. A long, desperate chain of emails pleading for extensions, promising payments that he knew he couldn't make. Then my dad opened the ledger. He showed me the pages, the numbers written in his familiar, neat script. Red ink everywhere. Losses piling up, year after year. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was heartbreaking. When Mom finally looked me in the eye and said it aloud, "We're going to lose everything, Sarah. The business, the savings, everything." I wasn't ready for how my heart would sink. It wasn't just about the lie anymore. It was about the terrifying, devastating truth. If someone you loved hid a devastating secret from you, all for your own good, is that forgivable? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I chose to stay. I sank down onto the sofa, the springs groaning under my weight. For a long time, nobody spoke. We just sat there in the ruins of our family's lies, the truth hanging heavy in the air between us. I was the one who broke the silence. "Talk to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No more secrets. No more protecting me. Tell me everything, from the beginning." And so they did. My dad started, his voice low and unsteady. He talked about the big box stores that moved into town, undercutting his prices. He talked about losing longtime contractors, about the rising cost of materials. He spoke of the sleepless nights, the terror of looking at the accounts and seeing more red than black. He admitted that the day I asked for the loan was one of the worst days of his life, because it was the first time he had to confront the reality that he couldn't provide for his family in the way he always thought he would. Then my mom spoke. She talked about her fear, not just of losing the money, but of losing him. She'd watched her own father go through a bankruptcy, and she saw how it broke him, how the shame followed him for the rest of his life. "I just saw you," she said, looking at my dad, her voice trembling. "I saw you becoming him, and I was so scared. I thought if we could just fix it, we wouldn't have to put you through that pain, Sarah. We wouldn't have to see that look of disappointment in your eyes. Maya finally broke down completely. She confessed that she had wanted to tell me 100 times. "It was eating me alive," she sobbed. "Every time we had one of those dinners without you, I felt like the worst sister in the world. But I was so scared. Dad made me promise." That's when the first real emotional turning point happened. My dad, my strong, stoic father who I had seen cry maybe twice in my entire life, put his face in his hands and started to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ragged, heartbroken sobs that shook his entire body. It was the sound of years of pent-up fear and failure finally being released. In that moment, the last of my anger dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming need to comfort him. I went over and sat next to him, putting my arm around his shaking shoulders. We all did. We huddled together on that couch, a broken, messy family, finally being honest with each other. We talked for hours. We cried. We yelled a little. I told them how their secrecy had made me feel isolated and untrustworthy, how it had damaged my ability to trust my own instincts. They listened. They really listened. And they apologized. Not with excuses, but with genuine, painful remorse. I thought we were starting to find a path forward, a way to start rebuilding. Just as I thought we might patch things up, Dad dropped a line that changed everything. He looked up, his eyes red and swollen, and said, "There's more. The house. We used the house as collateral on the last business loan. If the business goes under, the bank takes the house." Have you ever had a single conversation that completely changed your relationship with someone, for better or for worse? Share it if you feel comfortable. I feel like I just had one, and I'm still reeling. The news about the house landed like a bomb. It wasn't just about losing a business anymore. It was about losing our home. The place where I took my first steps, where Maya and I had carved our heights into the doorframe of the pantry, where all of our memories lived. The stakes had just been raised to an unbearable level. The next few days were a blur of practicalities. The secret was out, and we no longer had to operate in the shadows. We turned the dining room table into a war room, covering it with bank statements, legal notices, and spreadsheets. Uncle Frank, free from the pretense, laid out the grim reality. They were 6 months behind on their loan payments. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings. We had maybe 2 months, 3 if we were lucky, before we lost everything. There was no magic fix. There was no sudden inheritance or winning lottery ticket. The reckoning was here, and it was brutal. A plan. A messy, imperfect, terrifying plan. We would try to sell the business's assets, the trucks, the inventory, the client list, to a competitor. It wouldn't be enough to save the company, but it might be enough to pay off a significant chunk of the bank loan and save the house. It was a long shot. I took a week off work. I spent my days on the phone with lawyers, accountants, and potential buyers. I saw a side of my father I'd never seen before. Stripped of his pride, he was humble, honest, and surprisingly resilient. He was fighting for his family, and for the first time, I was fighting alongside him, not being shielded from the battle. We set new rules. The first and only rule was absolute brutal honesty. No more protecting each other's feelings. If someone was scared, they had to say it. If someone was angry, they had to voice it. If someone had bad news, we would all hear it together. Our first family dinner under this new rule was painfully awkward, but it was real. We didn't talk about the weather. We talked about the terrifying letter we got from the bank that day. It was awful, but it was together. I started looking at my own finances, figuring out how much I could contribute, what I could sell. The dream condo suddenly felt like a gilded cage, a symbol of a life built on a lie. It was a painful, humbling process, but it was ours. We were a family again, not in the perfect, polished way we were before, but in a new, stronger way, forged in the fires of a shared crisis. We learned that families don't just hide things out of malice. Sometimes they hide things for the messiest reasons of all: love, shame, and a desperate, misguided fear of causing pain. And that doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. We agreed on one thing, that that we would get through this no matter what as a family. But there's still one secret nobody will say out loud: the deep, unspoken fear that even with all of this, we might not be enough, that we might still lose it all. What would your first rule be if you were trying to rebuild trust with someone you love? What's the most important thing? A few nights ago, I stepped outside onto the front porch, the same porch where I had stood 3 weeks ago, smelling that ghost dinner. The air was cool and crisp. The house behind me was quiet, but it wasn't the empty, hollow quiet from before. It was a peaceful quiet. Everyone was asleep, exhausted from another long day of fighting for our future. I looked at that house, the paint peeling a little on the trim, the porch light casting a warm yellow glow, and it looked different. It was more than just a building. It was a symbol of everything we were fighting for. It wasn't perfect, and it was in danger, but it was ours. I don't know if we'll save it. I don't know if the business can be salvaged or if my parents will have to declare bankruptcy. The future is a giant, terrifying question mark. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not facing it alone. The trust is still fragile, a delicate thing we're all carefully trying to piece back together. It will take time, but we're talking, we're being honest, and we're showing up for each other. A single memory flashed in my mind: my mom's laugh. That big, uninhibited laugh that used to fill every room. I haven't heard it in a long time, but I'm hopeful that one day I will again. I'm going to keep you all updated on what happens next. This journey is far from over. If you've ever felt the sting of a family secret, or if the story resonated with you at all, hit that like button. It helps to know I'm not the only one who's navigated this kind of mess. And subscribe if you want to follow along, because things are about to get even more complicated. Now, I have to ask you, after hearing everything, what would you do? Would you forgive? Would you walk away? Tell me in the comments, in just one sentence. I would.